Hello and welcome to the Nutritank podcast, where we interview leading experts within the field of food systems, nutrition, and lifestyle medicine. Our aim is to empower you, the next generation of healthcare professionals and change makers. We believe that the valuable knowledge and experience of our guests will inspire you to act and join the movement in creating a healthier population.
Hello everyone, Luke here, Nutritank team member and nutrition student. We hope you enjoyed last episode where my co-host Ian had a wonderful chat with one of Ali and Ian's most significant lifestyle medicine mentors, Professor Trevor Thompson. He's an inner-city GP and Professor of Primary Care Education at Bristol Medical School. It really is a brilliant discussion and I think you'll love it if you haven't already checked it out. In this episode, I speak with one of my biggest food inspirations, Sheila Dillon. Sheila is a multi-award-winning food journalist, reporter and presenter for BBC Radio 4's The Food Programme. She's worked there for over 20 years, and Sheila and her colleagues have truly changed the way in which we think about food in the UK and beyond. Her work has covered the breaking scandal of BSE, the rise of GM foods, the growth of the organic movement from muck and magic to a multi-million-pound industry, the birth of the World Trade Organization, and irradiation at a time when those subjects were not even a gleam in a newshound's eye. In January 2008, she was awarded an honorary doctorate by City University for her work, which they say has changed the way in which we think about food. Welcome to the podcast, Sheila Dillon. It's a pleasure to have you here with me today. I must admit that I'm pretty young or new to the BBC Food Programme world, and I first became aware of it listening to your podcast episode with Dr. Rupi Aujla on his Doctor's Kitchen podcast last summer, and I was just inspired by one, your story, but also it kind of opened my eyes into the amazing work that you've done with the food program and all the rich resources there are there. So it's been a pleasure this last year kind of listening to those programs and seeing that joy and journalism that you bring to the world of food. And so if we go back in time a little bit, what was your relationship like with food, or what did food mean to you growing up before it became something to scrutinize?
I grew up in the countryside in Lancashire, so food was local. It was, it was utterly unself-consciously very, very good. And, we were friends with the farmers. It was a small village, so we knew everybody. And there was somebody in the village who had a horticultural enterprise, and there were 2 or 3 dairy farms, or more than that, but the ones near us. So, we got milk, cream, eggs, and the occasional chicken, which was a luxury. But, there were markets in Preston where my grandmother shopped, and I just liked food. I think I must have been naturally a greedy child. I really liked food. I really liked my grandmother's cooking, and I really liked my own mother's cooking. My mother worked full time, but my grandma was, a housewife, and I don't know, it was an unself-conscious pleasure, really. And all those things that we go on about now, like seasonality and localness, and they were just built into the food system. Nobody thought about it. Where I live is a village between Preston and Blackburn, and when you go out towards the sea, when you go out towards Blackpool or Morecambe, there's an area called the Fylde, and that's a fantastically rich, because it's used to have the sea there, and that was an amazing vegetable growing area. Well, it still is, but it feeds into a supermarket system which moves the stuff around. So we were working class. My granddad was the head carpenter at the estate which owned the village, and my mum was a weaver. She worked in the mill in part of the village.
And I think, one thing you said there, which was it was kind of an unself-conscious pleasure. It was, so would you say it wasn't a primary focus? And you mentioned that it was kind of the way it was, and there was nothing startling about it, but it in its natural form, it was.
Well, there was nothing startling about it, but it was a real pleasure. I really enjoyed it. And, like on Thursdays in the winter, if I ate at my grandparents', if I went round there for tea, as we called it, the meal at 5:30, there would be pea soup with ham, and I just remember how delicious that was, and thinking, "Oh, good, it's pea soup night." Neither my brother nor my sister have felt that way. I mean, they like food, my brother is a good cook, but don't think they had the kind of greed and that sort of thing I'm describing. I just think, I don't know, I was just born that way. I mean, my mother was just the same. Yeah. I didn't really experience horrible, bad food till I went to university. And then I saw that it was mostly middle class people who had, nasty food.
Yeah, so I guess tell us a little bit about that and when your relationship or perspective on food began to shift a little bit.
I honestly never thought about it. I did English at university. I went off to Finland to teach with the British Council. I tried to go to I did go to graduate school. It lasted a few weeks. Realized I was not suited to becoming an academic. Got a job in publishing in Indiana, where I was, and then I I worked in publishing and in Boston, and I was one of 6 women who brought a sex discrimination case against the company, and actually publishing bored me, even though I loved books. And it was awful for women back then. They were paid less than half of what men were paid. So food was just something I did. I really liked cooking, and at university I had bought Catherine Whitehorn's Cooking in a Bedsitter, and then I bought Elizabeth David, and for some reason I fell in with a group of students, a lot of them philosophy students, who liked cooking too. I don't know. I don't really know why. And all of us cooked, and we didn't have much money, but so cooking was just a skill I acquired. I mean, I knew it. I mean, I cooked at home because my mother worked full time. My brother and sister and I were supposed to help get tea ready before she got home. And honestly, it was a pleasure. And when I moved to live in, I was in Indiana. I didn't think much about food then. And then the next place I was Cambridge, Massachusetts. And that's where we were part of the sex discrimination case. And then I moved to California. And that's when I started to think about what a sort of black joke the American food system was. Well, I didn't even call it the food system then. I just thought, what a lot of rubbish there was. But there was a kind of pleasure in the ridiculousness of it. The cream in spray cans, and frozen orange juice in cardboard cartons that you twisted open, and croissants in the same kind of cardboard, frozen in the same kind of cardboard tubes. But it wasn't till, oh God, I was in my 30s, living in New York, that, I had a baby, and that this thing happened, that there was a pesticide incident. I mean, if you've listened to the Rupi Ojala thing, you know the story. That there's an area on Long Island, the Hamptons, the posh beach thing is around the edges, but in the middle, commercial potato growing. And what had happened is that they'd put this pesticide, which is finally got banned in 2015, but it was called Temic, and it was planted with the potatoes, and so that the potatoes, the plant, everything became imbued with this pesticide. And the New York Times that morning that I was reading, said there was this problem, that this pesticide had leached into the aquifer under Long Island. and therefore, was poisoning the well. There were still wells on Long Island that were used by some communities. Anyway, this is a long story. And I suddenly thought, God, here am I. I'm feeding my son potatoes possibly grown there or other places with this pesticide. And if it's in the water, how much is in the potatoes? So I went off to the library down at 42nd Street at Times Square and read up about pesticides and looked about pesticide regulatory limits, pesticide residue limits, PRLs. And I was astounded because I thought of myself as, being sort of political and skeptical, but actually I'd really, really thought that people were taking care of the food system, that there was a really good there was protection, and it was absolute rubbish. Pesticide residue limits were scientifically just pathetic, and they were the input of the people who made the pesticides, therefore making a great deal of money out of the pesticides, were part of the scientific safety regulatory process. And I thought, Jesus, who's writing about this? And the answer was not very many people. And so I started to think, well, I'm a journalist. At that point, I was writing for various magazines in New York, mostly about women and feminism. I wrote for Condé Nast magazines as well as other ones. Anyway, so there we are. I decided that I needed to find out more about food, and through various phoning people and trying to figure it out, I'd volunteered for a good magazine called Food Monitor, and then I got a job with Food Monitor, and I am married to a man who's a financial journalist, and he was kind of appalled at the idea that I would, suddenly, start writing about food. And he said, well, if you're going to do it, you follow the money, see who's making money out of this system. And so I used to write a column, besides other things. I used to write a column called Food Biz. And the Food Biz I was monitoring really what all the big companies all over the world were doing through the financial press. And so that was a good preparation. And then I heard this wonderful woman you might know about called Joan Gossow, who was an academic, a nutritionist, but quite a radical nutritionist in New York. And she was the one who told me about the Soil Association and Lady Eve Balfour and, different kinds of farming. And then we came to Britain, and then I heard Derek Cooper on the food program on Radio 4, and I thought, well, there's the place I need to work. And that took quite a while. So there you are, there's the potted story.
Wow. And it's kind of amazing to hear that kind of emergence out of a background which you almost took for granted, took a great pleasure out of, but it was just natural, it was normal. And then through exiting that and going into, like you mentioned, almost humorously startling ultra-processed food environment of the USA, trying to feed your son in a meaningful way, that these kind of influences and that the warning signs did begin to culminate in something which is saying, okay, this is serious, and you followed that trail. Why is it that you think that it took all of those things for you to question what was going on?
I don't know. I think, my upbringing was, well, I don't think you can imagine it, but in the 50s, in a village, you had enormous freedom. We children, left the house in the morning. I mean, school holidays, obviously, weekends, and didn't come home till tea time. And so everything about that, it was a beautiful village. I mean, there were woods and a river and summer times. My sister and I, when we were young, we were spent at this farm that one of the farmers was my sister's godfather. And So, animals and the whole process of food production was just part of our lives. And when I was 13, I started to work at the farm opposite our house, and just collecting eggs and working in the dairy and washing milk bottles, and just teenage work to make money. But it was, it's in me. Nature's in me. And my parents were very unhappy. They were, terrible marriage. Um, and I sometimes think that, it was the fact that we had so much freedom and that we were in the middle of this countryside, and, that's what saved me from, I don't know, depression. And, I can't imagine if I'd been locked up confined in any way with them most of the time. I would be a much more damaged person than I am now. So in a funny way, that, that morning in New York, when I read that story, it was sort of connecting, but, this country girl, this person who had a real interest in cooking and had read some, people like Elizabeth David, who, made a big thing about localness and in France and so on. And so it was a connection. It was like it was all those dots. And it was very funny because a few years ago, I was recorded for, the audio history for the British Library. And I was I was sort of stunned by it. It took hours. And I thought they were going to begin, at my becoming a food journalist. But actually, they asked me about my grandparents, for Christ's sake. And of course, when I was talking about my grandparents, my dad was from Northern Ireland, and my Irish grandparents were farmers. And of course, my grandmother was called the farmer's wife. But in fact, she was the farmer. She milked. They had 2 or 3 house cows. Well, they weren't house cows. I mean, they were for the house, but she didn't. She made butter. She sold her butter to the butterman who came around. She raised chickens. She fed the pigs. She grew the vegetables. It just made me think that I'd come out of something. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think what you're describing there is identity within a food system, and a sense of agency and a sense of understanding about what's happening within our food system. And for you and your grandparents, it sounded so local. And then you got to a point in New York where it was so removed, so distant, that you were thinking about some pesticides going on potatoes and how that was eventually making its way to your plate. I'm also aware that what you experienced as a food system during when you grew up may not have been what was happening for the whole country. And you've said before that for a long time, the highest quality a food had in the UK was its cheapness at the till. I'm wondering whether you can tell us, if we kind of zoom out into the British landscape, what led to that disconnect between the identity of individuals and the food system?
Well, I mean, I wasn't. I was a country girl, but my mother's family were all from Preston, an industrial town, and so I had cousins and aunts and uncles who all lived in the town. So I had experience of people eating in towns, and they too ate well because Preston had a market, just like all the towns around there had markets. I guess the disconnect came with increasing prosperity, the growth of the supermarkets. I mean, the growth of the supermarkets is key. And which, you put into, the localism. I mean, but, you can see it sort of in Africa now. You can see it in some African countries. You can see it in parts of Asia where, what's modern becomes highly desirable, and supermarkets were modern. They were the new thing. They just seemed like that was marvelous that you could go to one place and do all your shopping. And of course it occurred alongside women moving in much more into the workforce, except that I'd grown up with a mother who was in the workforce, so it didn't seem so strange to me. And that you cooked and you still valued food. So this, prosperity supermarkets, women in the workforce, allied in Britain with this long sense that food was not something that you talked about, that it didn't really matter, that it, I suppose had its trigger. I mean, I sort of just suppose. I mean, I've read something about it, but it still never quite explains it to me. The Industrial Revolution and the way that we never had, like the French, we never had a redistribution of land. We never had we had a revolution, but it didn't lead to anything dramatic the way it did in France. So, and we're not good at sensual pleasures, are we, Brits? And so, you go to Italy and France and Spain and Greece, and people are open about the pleasure they take in food. And when I tell you those stories about my grandmother cooking well and my mother cooking well, it's not something you talked about. And my mother actually was seen as pretty odd in her family, because she would go out and pick mushrooms and she'd say, "Isn't this good?" This, and she'd cook the mushrooms. Or Alec Lord, the man who had a vegetable business in the village, and he would come round on Thursday nights, I think, and she would go out to his van, because it wasn't just what he grew; he bought things as well, and she would say, "Alec Lord has coconuts," and I've bought one. So she was the only person I knew who was like that. I mean, my grandmother, my aunts, certainly my dad. Good God, no. So we didn't have that. We're not very good at sensual pleasures, and we're not good at. So I think a lot of all these things came together, and in the post-war years, we had this new model of what medicine was, what health was, and health, which used to have a more holistic, notion, that what you ate and what you did had some bearing on that. And that was also part of my childhood, that if you weren't very well, my mother would make beef tea, and there were certain things that that were part of getting you well or keeping you well. But we embraced this, a pill for every ill model, and or surgery and technology, and that's sort of at the same time as while we were getting more divided from our food, the notion of what health was, that narrowed as well. And I think all that, and then, the food industry was getting more sophisticated with its global supply chains. And, and actually another absolutely key point was Thatcher and Reagan, that's the economics of that period, that the answer to every, the market had the answer, and efficiency and value for money to the consumer, without what that value might mean, how it might harm your health or your environment, or that also, all these things came together. So that's what you're saying, how did we get divided from our food? I think all those things were part of it.
Are you a healthcare professional looking to elevate your knowledge of nutrition and lifestyle medicine? Nutritank CIC wants to empower you to have the communication skills and knowledge of lifestyle medicine to improve your patients' health through free CME accredited webinars hosted every Monday evening. Learn from leading experts in the field and gain access to cutting-edge research and best practice. Here's what you gain through our webinars: enhanced knowledge of nutrition and lifestyle medicine and applying it in clinical practice, continued medical education credits to maintain your license, and free access to a library of previously recorded high-quality educational webinars. Take action now. Register for upcoming webinars or become a member at nutritank.com. The links will be provided in the show notes. Invest in your clinical practice and patients' well-being and fuel their health with Nutritank CIC.
Yeah, and I think talking about that kind of efficiency model of food, it's very important to, I think, especially in a cost of living crisis now that we find ourselves in, it's very tempting for people to think, okay, yeah, more food, more accessible means a positive thing. What are some of the biggest costs you've seen when we pursue the cheapness of food?
Well, our health. Health and the environment. That there has been a disregard of what this cheap food, this idea of cheap food, what that has meant for people, and the ways that the production of that food, the monoculture, the use of the outrageous use of pesticides and artificial fertilizers, and the destruction of nature, as though that didn't matter. That it's like this biblical thing, nature, it's for us to crush, and nature's come back to bite us.
And how do you find it within your daily work within the BBC Food Programme, at least, trying to present on that, trying to navigate the waters of an industry which is still reluctant to let go of that efficiency? I think I was just listening to one episode recently, and it says, we tried reaching out to these people, but nobody was available to speak, and that sounds like quite a common occurrence. So
it is a common occurrence now. Yeah, we used to be able to get the food industry to talk now, but I can imagine, if I was an executive of Coca-Cola, what would you say? Your entire economic model is built on these kind of ultra-processed foods. Everybody knows now, and it's accepted that sugar, the high level of sugar in your diet is damaging. And we're not even talking about ultra-processed, just let's talk about sugar. So now there's lots of new science was saying, actually, artificial sweeteners aren't that great either. So what are you doing? You're a global company, you're making beverages, and suddenly the two bases of your doing that are problematic. That the scientific consensus has built about one, and it's now building about the other to say, these are not a good idea at all. But you've got trillions invested. You've got hundreds of thousands of employees. You have an amazing distribution system. What would you do? You wouldn't be tempted to close your eyes and go,
Yeah, and it's that lack of willingness to kind of discuss on your terms, I guess. I think you're trying to present a balanced and fair argument, or a discussion at least. And so I can imagine that it's challenging in that environment to have a discussion when you're trying to say, this is what they might say.
Yes. It's very difficult. I mean, the it's fascinating, the ultra-processed food argument. The science from Montero and so on in Brazil, and the definition, and the food industry's refusal even to use those three two words, hyphenated, ultra-processed food. I don't know how they're going to go forward with this. I mean, they are arguing, they want to argue it's salt, sugar, fat, and that's not a problem for us because we can manipulate. We can make lower fat, lower sugar, lower salt foods. And if that's not the issue, what are they going to do? I mean, Chris Van Tulleken says, well, in his book, Ultra Processed People, right? That's it. He says, we should start by making sure that the bodies that set the rules and give advice, and they don't engage with them just in the way that we would not any longer engage with the tobacco industry. That you try and the government's scientific advisory committee on SACNI on food. I don't think it's quite half the people, but a lot of those people on that panel are deeply involved with the food industry. the big food industry and their organizations, their trade organizations, their lobbying organizations.
Yeah. And I think when you end on these kind of terms, and it's with a system as entrenched as it is, and an advisory committee which is meant to scrutinize and hold these things to account, being comprised of their members. I mean, yeah, where do you find hope? You've described yourself as maybe being a harbinger of doom in the past.
Sometimes I wish I'd gone into forestry. Sometimes I don't feel hopeful, and then I think, well, there was a wonderful journalist in the United States called I.F. Stone, and he used to produce a weekly, the I.F. Stone's Weekly, and he said that if you were working on a problem, if you were trying to answer a question, and you thought you were going to do it in your own lifetime, then you just hadn't asked a big enough question. It's the process. You're the process. Nutritank's the process. I'm the process. You just have to do to question, to try and call people to account, to be fair, to think about the difficulties that we face. You just got to keep pushing. I don't know. There are no easy answers, and I'm certainly not going to get an answer in my lifetime. And I don't even know whether you are in yours, but we've gone so fast from a fairly healthy nation. I mean, we had infectious diseases, and the brilliance of science has dealt with so many of them. But we've now got this, we've created this crazy sick society where people do in fact live a bit longer, but they live sick. And so it's changed so fast that it sort of gives me hope that, we can move things back a bit. And I do see localism having an effect, but it's very hard when people aren't paid enough. When we have poverty and inequality like that, and so people go, "Oh, well, you need cheap food to feed the poor." Well, you shouldn't have the poor. That should not be the case. So you need to work on that as well. Did you hear at Christmas? I mean, I've quoted this before, but Hurdy Shepherd, the guy who wrote some English pastoral, he was a guest editor of the Today program, the way they do at Christmas. One of the presenters said to him, after he'd explained something about the cost of food, cheap food, and the way that wasn't really cheap, and he said, "But we need cheap food to feed the poor." And he said, "You don't deal with poverty by messing about with the price of food. You do that by the redistribution of income." And I agree with him totally. They changed the subject, and the presenter changed the subject immediately. But you do. You don't. Cheap food is not the answer. I mean, one of the things that drives me crazy, and I guess it drives everybody crazy, is the way our government, has these silos, health, education, DEFRA, et cetera. These things have to be connected. Farming has to be connected to health, has to be connected to the environment, has to be connected to schools, has to be connected to the medical system. Maybe we're learning really slowly. I don't know. You're in the system. You're a student now. Do you think you having a more holistic nutrition education than you would have done 10 years ago?
I think perhaps, but I also think, as you've kind of mentioned earlier, there's an impatience with systems which is entirely productive, and it encourages us to kind of focus this light of outrage and hope for a better picture in a productive manner. But it's also about understanding how slowly these systems move. I study nutrition. I won't be learning about the gut microbiome for my entire degree, and it's kind of all just like a sprinkle in like current areas of nutrition, a third year module towards the end. And so kind of discussing that with lecturers, it's like, yeah, I guess these kind of things, it takes about 10 years to work its way in. And if we talk about your role kind of shining a light on some of the change makers, I think that's really important to talk about as a source of hope as well. And at Nutritank, just a couple of days ago, Ali Jaffe put a post talking about Nutritank's first big break, and it was when you spoke to them on a program in 2018, and then that program got turned into a news article, and that went viral. And they've been working for 5 or 6 years now. And through that time, there's been a curriculum put together with the Association for Nutritionists. The most recent one was released in 2021. And that's on offer to med schools now. But the kind of rate of change, Ian Broadley was saying that they they set their curriculum kind of once every 5 years. So it's about balancing this kind of ambition and with pragmatism with the systems we're dealing with. And I think an amazing way to kind of go outside of that, as you do, is, I mean, you've set up the BBC Food and Farming Awards, which is a fantastic way of shining light on those change makers. So I wondered whether you'd mind telling us a little bit about that experience of that.
No, that's it. It's wonderful that we, the awards give us, as you say, that chance to identify change makers and to sort of point and say, these people are setting the model. These people they give us hope. They show a different way. And like I went a couple of weeks ago, I went to one of the people who's shortlisted for the producer awards, Carrie Rhymes, who's a cheesemaker just outside Bangor in northwest Wales. And she's been a scientist, a senior civil servant, and working on biodiversity and the effect that complex eating has on farm animals, and what it does to their guts, to their to the milk they produce, the meat they produce. And she decided almost at the time she retired that she was going to change her life. She was going to become a cheesemaker. Anyway, she went off to France on as a woofer, one of these, you volunteer at an organic farm. Anyway, she learned how to be a cheesemaker. And now she's working with sheep farmers and the hills, and who are working, and I found myself using this word and then realizing what a terrible word it is, working where these sheep are on marginal land, that not improved land, but in fact that land is incredibly rich. It's herbs and flowers, and so these sheep produce wonderful milk, but they haven't been used for milk, but they were just being used for meat. And so now she is providing income for these 3 different farms, additional income to what they would get, and so like a buffer against when meat prices drop, but showing through the quality of her cheese the fact that you can make something really great, you can make money, the farmers, this marginal land can be economically productive. We've gone so far down this, this quantity path. And as we produce way too much food. People say, well, the billion, the 9 billion, 10 billion, 11 billions coming, and we must produce more and more food. Well, that's it's absolute rubbish. We produce far too much. We waste a massive amount, and what we produce, we turn into a lot of crap things. Like think of all that palm oil, think of all that monocropping, and people go, well, it's actually economically very efficient to produce palm oil, because if you produced oil through sunflowers or something, you couldn't produce as much oil per acre as you do with palm oil. Well, hang on a minute. What are we using palm oil for? Do we need to produce those things? No, we don't. They're not essentials. We don't ask those questions anymore. We've just productivity, not quality. And we don't ask what, as you said right at the beginning, we don't ask what that efficient productivity costs us in the environment and our health.
Yeah. And I think it's almost, you talked a little bit about the kind of systems being very siloed before. You kind of got your health, your farming, kind of economics. And so these systems, which all require a lot from each other, aren't actually talking and trying to create a meaningful coexistence. And I guess, yeah, are there any particular examples that come to mind when you think of a good combination of those?
You mean I mean, I can think. Well, I'll tell you a bad thing, but to start. Oh, in about 2015, we did a program about omega-3 fats and using, Michael Crawford from Imperial for the Institute of Nutrition and Brain Chemistry and the guy from Oxford, I can't remember his name. And the Oxford group had just done this study in a young offenders institute, and which showed that a diet supplemented with vitamins and omega-3 cut violence by a huge amount. I mean, the prison officers, there was no argument about it. It was really outstanding, and of course it did what Michael Crawford said it would, because you were affecting the brain with omega-3, because your brain needs those fatty acids, and there's very little of it in a processed diet. Anyway, so we recorded a lot of the stuff. They wouldn't let us go to the Young Offenders Institute, but anyway, we made this program. So we rang up the press office at the Home Office to, the whatever it's called now, and to the prison part. And we spoke to one of the senior press officers, and we said, what are you going to do next, given, what's been shown in this study? And he said, off the record, love, we're not interested in that kind of thing. And this was an astounding study. We're not interested in that kind of thing, love. Anyway, there we are. There's a bad example of, not making, so the effect that this the terrible diet was having on them. A good story from the awards. There's a wonderful dairy in Sheffield, just outside Sheffield, called My Cow Molly. And they have shown what a farm can do. Where they go, okay, we're not providing commodity milk anymore. We've had it. They didn't invest a lot, but they did get some money, and they started processing their own milk, and they're delivering glass bottles. That was a development afterwards, but they have a business with Sheffield University. They supply all the milk there. They have a fantastic business with coffee shops, because their milk is really makes a difference to the quality of coffee. They've shown in one of the areas where there has been one of the biggest losses in farming. People have moved out of dairy, and pigs is almost as bad, or maybe as bad now. But they've just shown that if you go, no, this, why would we fit in with this absurd processing supermarket model? It's a disaster. It's been a disaster. If you want to see what disaster is, look at the United States. Where bigger is good, keeping thousands of cows, and and you have lots of vets, and it's supposed to be terribly good for the cows. It's rubbish. The model, all that it benefits are the big guys. And My Cow Molly, makes ice cream too. And they've really said, here is a working economic model. Other people can do it. And I guess that's, there are a lot of those over the years in the awards, and I hope there'll be more this year.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're experiencing each year the things getting bigger. And I mean, I was just looking through the shortlisted awards this year, and I think if anyone out there is not feeling hope or feeling pessimistic, that is an amazing place to lift your spirits. Yeah. And I can't remember, I think there was a digital award.
Yeah, there's a digital award that Layla Kazim, one of the presenters, is doing. Yes. Yeah.
Or food innovation. I can't remember which.
Food innovation is Dan. Yeah. They're the old BBC model, really, aren't they, of Lord Reith? Inform, entertain, educate. You want, that's the joy of something like the BBC. I mean, if you didn't have the BBC, you couldn't have things like that.
Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying this episode so far and learning a lot. For those of you who are new listeners, welcome. If you're finding this information valuable, I would love for you to consider joining our regular listener family. Just hit that follow button wherever you're listening and you'll never miss a new episode. By the way, one of our main goals is to educate as many healthcare professionals as possible about the power of nutrition and lifestyle medicine. So if you know someone who might benefit from this information, whether it's a colleague, friend, or family member working in the field, please consider sharing this episode with them. Now let's get back to the show and dive deeper.
Yeah, and I think it's wonderful, and I think it's amazing seeing all the work that you guys have done over there. And I'm also conscious we've kind of been talking about the systems at large here, and these shining lights showing that people don't have to feed into these big systems and can start meaningful change on their own. But we've also got another lens to look through it, which is kind of, you've worn another hat, which is being a patient, and that's given you a kind of insight into the health system and where food fits within that. So, yeah, do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
I guess I'd always had a background feeling that, that what you ate, affected your health. You are what you eat, literally. But it wasn't till my sister, 20 odd years ago, my sister lives in Northern California, got breast cancer. And it was a very unpleasant one. It was small cell. It wasn't a tumor. And she is an occupational therapist and works in hospitals. And she decided, after reflection and talking to people, that she would only have surgery. She would have a mastectomy. In fact, she'd have a double mastectomy. But she would not have chemo, and she would not have radiation, which is what was recommended. I mean, not that it was recommended that there was any likelihood it was going to save her life. I mean, she was... there was a small chance that she would live more than 5 years or 10 years. But anyway, it wasn't good. So she made this decision. And I must say I was really, really worried about her, because I hadn't thought that much about it, really. And, the whole family was thinking she was mad, that she was going to do it by diet and, meditation and, being exercise and stuff. Anyway, she did it, and she's fine, and she's never had a recurrence, and she obviously didn't die. So that sort of came at the same time as the World Cancer Trust, and so they published, I'm not sure they've done it, but they published these epidemiological studies showing that societies where there were much higher intakes of fruit and vegetables and fish had lower cancer rates. And I wonder, because of what my sister done, I wonder what would happen. What if you had a diet, with all those things, whether it would help prevent recurrence. So, because I was the senior producer at the food program at the time, and I thought that would make a good program. So we made a program, and it was incredibly difficult to make, because all the cancer people that we rang, all the research places, they all thought we were mad. They treated us. I mean, it wasn't like they were it wasn't like they were, it wasn't, oh, that's an interesting thought. They just went. They were contemptuous of us. And so it kind of, that rolled along, because it seemed to me that was a question worth asking. How do we know? We don't know. They just say, no, it couldn't make any difference. Well, how do you know? You don't. It's just pure prejudice and lack of evidence and lack of interest in doing any research. So, when I got cancer 12 years ago now, multiple myeloma, bone marrow. By that time, things had moved along a bit, and there was a wonderful book by Schreiber. There's a very good book, a Penguin book, where he was a doctor and and also a scientist. And he had gout because he'd had brain cancer, and he had brain cancer and he died of it, quite a few years later. But he pulled together all the research that there was, or animal studies, laboratory studies, and very, very few ones on humans, because where's the money to be made? Because it's back to that old pharma model, and you don't research things unless they can be patented and you can make money out of them. And so this was a growing understanding in my mind that because there's a lack of evidence, it doesn't mean there isn't evidence. It just means, nobody's looked. And so it just made me understand better. And it also made me understand that I could do something about my own health, my own recovery from cancer, my own increasing my chances of the cancer not coming back. And who knows if it's worked? I'm one person, but fortunately, I have a very open-minded specialist who is one of the leading people in the world on multiple myeloma, and he works at Barts, Jamie Kavanagh, and and he was happy to. I mean, I'd have done it anyway, but he was happy to be part of the process, and and I think we're more and more understanding of that health is not technologies and pills. I mean, those things are important. I'm alive because, eating broccoli would not have, I had crushed vertebrae. I had, I was in a mess by the time I was actually diagnosed. But it's much more than that. And health has to be understood more and more. And Jamie Kavanagh said at one point, when we were talking about, the gut microbiome that you're not going to be taught about in your degree, which is completely bonkers. He said, that's going to revolutionize cancer treatment. And it is.
Yeah. And I think you talk about something needing to be patented and needing to have this kind of model, this rollout for it to be meaningfully considered within a health spectrum. But also, I think when people talk about food and health in its small way that it does work its way into medical or health curriculums, they talk about chronic disease. We have this obesity epidemic. We have kind of lots of diabetes, hypertension, and even that is touched on so minutely that it's quite amazing that you managed to find this courage and these other people, these other examples of using food meaningfully. And I guess thinking about your doctor, was it Jamie Kavanagh?
Yeah.
And his role, he was very happy to go along with it, but they're just in the formal training, there's no understanding of how to meaningfully use food as a tool for managing and combating and preventing diseases. And so I think, we come back to Nutritank's plan here. It's kind of like you've got this medical curriculum at the moment. Sadly, in most medical university courses, there's still 4 to 6 hours on nutrition. That is on the kind of detailed physiology, biochemistry of the digestive system. It's not how can we empower patients to use food in their daily lives as preventative and a way to manage health and disease. And so being in hospital, what do you wish there had been a bit more top-down information from?
Oh, God. Well, I mean, I must say, of course, that was why producer Claire Salisbury and I were so interested in Nutritank when we first heard about Ali Jaffe and Ian Broadley. That's we just thought, my God, people working to change the curriculum. But when I was in hospital, the thing that, I have written about this, but I'd go in for my chemotherapy, and you're lying in these chairs, and the poison is going in that you hope is going to do you good. You're trying to be positive about this this chemotherapy that you're getting, and then the trolley comes down, pushed by volunteers who are just the nicest people. They're giving their time, and they're wanting to do good, and the trolley is full of rubbish, and so chocolate bars and crisps and, and Lucozade and every known fizzy drink. And you think, this is bonkers. We're all possibly here, affected by a society where that kind of food has been normalized. And we're having this poison filled, which they're trying to cure us with this. And now there's some more coming down the aisle. And that was really shocking to me. And then I would hear these nurses. There was a young guy, this is in the hemo-oncology, department. So all of us had different kinds of, leukemia and so on. And this young guy who just, he didn't look well at all. And he was kind of sad. And he was talking to the nurse about it. And I don't think he had a lot of support. He went to a fast food chain a lot and, would eat chips and drink Coke. And she said, "That's fine, love, that's fine." And, she was really trying to be kind to him. And, you just need to eat. You wanted her to be really kind and think, but to say, if you just to give more help to people about eating better food if they can, even if you go to a fast food restaurant, that chips and Coke are just not, they're not going to help you recover. They're not going to help you, just this whole calories business that you get fed all the time. When I asked, if they had any advice about eating, it's just, no. A balanced diet. What does that mean? Well, little what you fancy. And I didn't. I'm privileged. I'm middle class now. I can afford these things. And I didn't give up pleasures. But it's easy for me to say because I can cook. And, that's the other thing that changed. You asked me what changed early on. Well, the other thing was that people stopped being taught how to cook. And then we got these generations of people who haven't got a basic life skill. Can you cook?
Yeah, I love cooking. But again, yeah. And I think there's a word that comes up for me is resilience. And I think that's something that is kind of deeply personal, and we're not being encouraged to develop that resilience, whether it's feeding our bodies the right food to develop their own immune resilience, or necessarily having cultures that encourage and place food and cooking as a pillar stone, so that we have that resilience to provide for ourselves.
Yeah.
And so I guess we come on to our final questions now, which we ask every guest. And I think self-care tip, you've obviously come from a working class background. You now say you're privileged. And so I guess, what do you think is one self-care tip that people can employ in their own lives to build some of that resilience?
I think learn to cook. And I think there are lots of things online, lots of cooking lessons online, like Tom Kerridge did, has done a series of very simple things. Just try. It's it will give most people pleasure. I know there's genuinely some people who don't like cooking, but learning to cook is a really empowering life skill. It just is. The Delia, that every single thing that Delia Smith has ever made in her life is now free to watch and give you help with online. There's just lots of stuff. I was very struck during lockdown. We made a food program with some young people who were involved in trying to get better food, and we were talking about their families, and these were kids on low incomes, and families on low incomes, and they told stories of the difficulties of getting food and using their vouchers and things at supermarkets. But at the very end, I discovered none of them could cook. It's easy for me to say, but their lives would have been a lot easier if all those teenagers could have cooked. Anyway, there's I think it's worth learning to cook. It's a life skill.
Yeah, and as an amazing, Drew Ramsey says it's not just about the nourishment we derive from the food. It's sharing food with other people, cooking with other people.
Absolutely, yeah. Sitting with a microwave meal lonely with a fork on a sofa. That's miserable.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think being conscious of the audience, we've got young healthcare professionals, students, people hoping to make a change and create a healthier future. Through your career or looking out at the current climate right now, what do you think is one strength that we need to cultivate in order to kind of maximize our chances or bolster our own resilience?
Skepticism of authority. Look at the world through your own eyes. There aren't very many people who do it. Just look, pay attention, and trust your perceptions. And be skeptical. Some of the things sometimes I do worry about. The young people that they aren't skeptical enough of authority. They don't think about what who's making money out of things. This whole vegan business. It's fine to be vegan, but if you don't understand that for the food industry, it's a most marvelous opportunity to produce the same highly processed food. It doesn't matter to them to miss out some animal-based ingredients, but you can charge a big margin. Just be skeptical, look at the world clearly, question authority.
Yeah, and I guess when you find community in that skepticism, it almost takes some of that burden off your shoulders when you.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I don't mean be cynical. I think cynicism's, destructive and awful, but be skeptical. And
then I guess that brings us on to kind of one example of how we can act for our own communities. Yeah, what do you think?
acting for our own communities. Well, you can support as much as you can support local initiatives. You can support local businesses. Could support people who are doing things right. And people say, oh, well, people are, people are poor. And yes, money that's a crucial thing, that whether you have money. But if you can cook, you can spend less money, making food yourself. But there are a lot of really prosperous people in Britain. I look at Costa's profits. Costa coffee costs nearly £3 now. People could spend money supporting local things. They could not spend, nearly £3 on a Costa coffee. I'm sorry to name Costa. There are plenty of other chains. You know what I mean? Support what's local if you can. I mean, I know sometimes perhaps there isn't that much that is local. Volunteer at a food bank to try and understand what's going on. Pay attention. Emerson, the American philosopher, said the key in life is pay attention, watch, look at things. Don't let the world drift by.
Yeah, and then I mean, you've mentioned Emerson there, but have you got a resource for our audience about how we can kind of cultivate more of these attitudes or find out something about inspiration?
Well, I think Emerson's a great inspiration to me. But poetry often is. I was just listening to this wonderful documentary about Mary Oliver, the American poet, which is about paying attention to the wonders of the world, because that will make you feel better instead of, it's so easy when we're so surrounded by so much social media, so much idiocy, so much evidence that stupidity is a very, very powerful force in the world. To look at the world and its wonder, pay attention. And, poetry reminds me of that. Emerson reminds me of that. Mary Oliver reminds me of that. Auden reminds me of that.
Fantastic. Well, I'm certainly going to have to check out them myself. And yeah, I just want to say a big thank you for all the light that you bring to the space of food. I know it can feel like a dark place sometimes. And yeah, I'm certainly going to go and listen to more and more food programs, explore the poets you've been talking about, and I encourage our audience to do so as well. So yeah, thank you.
No, thank you, Luke. You're a very good interviewer.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, share it with your friends and family and drop us a review on your preferred podcast platform. Don't forget to follow the show on your favourite streaming platform and connect with us online to stay up to date with all the latest news and episodes. If you feel engaged with a particular aspect of today's show, then please comment on our social media posts for this episode. They'll be linked in the show notes. See you in the next episode.